Welcome back, listeners, to another episode of Susan Lopresti Wellness, Mind, Body, and Soul. This is the podcast where we explore the highs, the lows, and everything in between when it comes to a woman's life, her health, and all aspects of navigating the midlife landscape. I'm your host, Susan Lopresti, and today I have a very special guest with me who I know that you're going to enjoy. Her name is Melanie Weller. Melanie has 30 years of working as a physical therapist and athletic trainer, combining biomechanics and neurotheology with patients that no one else could figure out. Gifted Melanie Weller a reputation as a vagus nerve expert and also the body whisperer. She trained with nationally and internationally renowned experts and collected certifications and credentials like fine wines. Then she had a health crisis, followed by a marriage crisis and a lawsuit crisis as well. Her credentials did not help her make sense of the nonsense in her life. Turning to astrology, Melanie was led to the extraordinary discovery and the research to support it. Our bodies are clocks that mirror the celestial architecture of the zodiac. Our wellness depends on synchronizing our nervous system with the cosmic dance of the solar system. One day, a patient with a long history of religious trauma walked into Melanie's office. He had his suicide planned for that night. She realized she had to bring more than all her credential-based knowledge. She had to treat his consciousness itself. 90 minutes later, he walked out 90% better, and Melanie walked out with her fearless presence. Since then, Melanie has been leading the resilience revolution, advocating, teaching, and speaking on heretical healing as a transformative approach that challenges the conventional beliefs to unite ancient wisdom and modern science for spiritual resilience, the key to all forms of resilience. And without further ado, Melanie, welcome to my podcast. I am so excited for this conversation with you today, and let's just jump right in.
Thank you, Susan. I'm so grateful that you're sharing your platform with me, and I'm very excited to share with you and your audience today.
Great. So I want to first get into what was your journey that brought you to this work that you're currently doing?
Yeah. Well, it was a really hearty midlife crisis. I had
Okay,
in
that's
my
when
early,
it usually happens,
yeah,
right?
in my early 40s, I had a health crisis, marriage crisis, and lawsuit crisis all in very close proximity. And it was very clear to me that maybe the universe wanted me to do something different with my work, or that something else was happening. And in the midst of that, I've been a physical therapist and in athletic training for over 30 years. But, this was a good 12, 14 years ago when all of this happened. But my reputation has always been as the body whisperer. And I had collected credentials and certifications like some people collect fine wines. And still there were others that I couldn't help. And so I collected more credentials and more certifications. And and then my life fell apart. And none of my academic or logical knowledge was making sense of what was happening in my life. And I admittedly had always kind of straddled the line between, I had taken a lot of evidence-based courses, and I also took a lot of osteopathic courses, which are a little more alternative. And I had learned how to decompress arteries from veins, from nerves, from organs, and all sorts of specificity. But those were not, in the 90s and 2000s, were not mainstream
Not back
classes
then,
at all.
right?
But my husband was in the Navy for 20 years, and wherever we moved, people found me. If nobody else could figure you out, you ended up coming to me. And so in the midst of my midlife crisis, when I do my public speaking, I call it fondly my lawsuit latte. but my intuition had really exploded at that time too. And I was just kind of eerily accurate with what people needed to do or what was going on with them. And it all kind of culminated with a client saying, like, I thought I was giving her a metaphor of like this older woman in a pink suit with a pink lapel on her orchid. And she said, Melanie, that's my grandmother and what we buried her in. And I didn't know that. And so I was really unsure of what was happening to me if I was having a psychotic break. But I was in this new space, and a patient walked into my office that had his suicide plan for that evening.
Oh,
And he was living in a nightmare of a hallucination that other people had not been able to help him with. And we had a mutual contact, and she set up the appointment. And I thought he was coming for back pain or something like that. I had no idea why he was coming to my office. And I knew in my heart that I had to show up with more than just my professional knowledge. And I got him set up with the psychiatrist that I knew. Physical therapy is not the go-to place for hallucinations typically.
right.
And I really didn't know that I could help him. But I thought, okay, I have this whole system for treating the vagus nerve as a pinch nerve. I'm just going to decompress his vagus nerve and direct him to the right people I know that will take care of him. And 90 minutes later, he was 90% better.
Wow.
And we really saved each other that day. He sent me a text later that night about, because he hadn't explicitly come out and said he had plans to kill himself that evening, but he couldn't make eye contact with anyone because their faces would start melting. And there was an episode that triggered this that was an acute onset situation. And I still struggle with the words to describe what it's like to be part of an experience with somebody like this. I got to see him this recently at Mardi Gras and give him a big hug. And it's just so fun to see how successful and how everything's going really well for him these days. But I really walked out with my fearless presence because I didn't just bring my technical expertise. I brought my intuition, I brought my heart, I brought my soul. I showed up
Right.
with everything that I had for him too. And what he really showed me more technically in the long run, and that I have seen as a recurring pattern, is how objectively measurable suicide ideation and planning are in the body. Because his body, I can absolutely make the case through the objective data that I collected from his body that he was living in rigor mortis. And his body was telling his brain that it was dead. And so then he had this behavioral drive to match that. And our bodies, from a scientific perspective, really inform our brains. We can't have a new thought or a new way of behaving unless we create a new way of moving.
Wow.
And having treated a lot of mental health referrals over the years for anxiety and eating disorders and wide range, even bipolar and schizophrenia, and they all have their unique body signatures that go with them. And the take-home message from that is that stress lives in the body very predictably based on what's happening in your life. It can be very precise, and the severity of it, the more severely your vagus nerve, for example, is locked down, then the more likely you are to be in suicide ideation and planning. And I spent many years in that space too. And my midlife crisis really catalyzed me out of that in some amazing ways. You don't always get the healing the way that you expect, but I know that my attraction to working with the vagus nerve was solving my own vagus nerve compression, although that's very much hindsight knowledge.
Yeah.
When I was really in it, I didn't
I
see it
want
quite
to
that
get
way.
into talking about the vagus nerve, but I want to go back to this particular gentleman.
Mm-hmm.
When he walked into your office for the first time, did you intuitively know that he had suicide ideation or
No,
any
no, I
kind
knew
of
it was bad. I just knew it was bad. I knew it was a nightmare. I knew he was in a terrible spot and that something urgent needed to happen, that this was something that had to shift now. And I was very, maybe not outwardly, but inwardly feeling very vulnerable. I was like, I don't know, like, this isn't my wheelhouse,
right.
basically, and I had already had one professional lawsuit. I wasn't looking for another one. All the things that can go through our heads. And I could make the case that my professional skills were certainly what unlocked things for him.
Yeah.
But I did ask him, because my intuition had just exploded so much in that same window of time. I asked him if it was okay if I used my intuitive skills with him, and he was open to that. And I told him that I saw in my mind's eye. I said, "Well, I see somebody that you're hitting a ball back and forth with him, and I feel like he died. It looks to me like he died of a head injury, and he lost somebody very close to him that he used to play tennis with that died in a rock climbing accident. And I had no knowledge of this person beforehand. So just bringing that image through and a little bit of a message brought a lot of tears, gave him a big emotional release too. And that was probably equal to or more valuable than the clinical stuff that I did,
Right.
because we know now in the research that spirituality is like nothing can touch. If you could put spirituality in a pill, no other intervention or medication can even touch it. So, like the statistics on spirituality with respect to mental health and even physical health issues are extraordinary, but especially mental health. Like it's the most protective and healing thing to have a spiritual belief. So when you feel like you've got your loved ones close, like that's one way that you can just have massive amounts of healing. I've read other books that talk about beautiful stories from like Day of the Dead celebrations and things like that, that when we really see the world as bigger than ourselves,
Yeah.
you know, and spirituality is really your relationship with your authority, your inner authority. And religion is your relationship with outer authority. And that's basically how the research divides it up. And when you come into touch with the authority of your body and what you know to be true in your bones, which really our bones are so tied to memory in our bodies, that when you get those deep knowings, they're incredibly medicinal. And science is wonderful, but science also doesn't explain everything around.
Right.
And when we can put together the science and the spirituality, or just sometimes at the end of the day, we're all storytellers, and all spiritual traditions are collections of stories. And when we can really put those together in meaningful and prescriptive ways, it opens incredible portals for healing. And I have a very kind of clinical way that I approach that's really rooted in time.
What do you mean by that?
So in the midst of my midlife crisis, what I ended up turning to astrology
Okay.
to figure out what was happening to me, because nothing else was making sense of it. And in astrology, all the parts of the body are associated with each of the constellation has what they call rulership over a part of the body. So for example, Aries rules the head, Taurus rules the throat, Gemini rules the lungs, Leo rules the heart, Cancer rules the breasts. And what I realized as I started to study astrology, that all of the shapes that are associated with the constellations are shapes of our of anatomical structures inside of us. So, for example, the ventricles of the brain that make cerebral spinal fluid are the same shape as the ram's horns that represent Aries, and Aries rules the head. Your throat anatomy, the way the hyoid bone sits on top of your larynx, looks like the Taurus bull, and Taurus rules the throat. Your aortic arch is the same shape as the symbol for Leo, and Leo rules the heart. Your kidneys sit in your low back like a set of scales, and Libra rules the kidneys, which is represented by a set of scales. And the populations with the highest levels of social injustice have the highest levels of kidney disease. So we embody the stress of injustice at the level of the kidneys. But it works this way all the way down the body in the order of the zodiac. And it works this way inside of the cells too. Like Jupiter rules the liver, and our liver cells look like the planet Jupiter.
I never knew that.
And so, and a molecule of ATP, which is the energy source for all cellular function, like muscle contractions and all of our cellular energy, is the same shape as the stars in the Aries constellation and the same archetypal function. And this works through both the Western astrology system. This works through the Vedic astrology, the Indian astrology system as well. And with their deities, like, for example, the Hindu deity Ganesh looks like our brainstem and cerebellum, and Ganesh is the remover of obstacles, and that's what our brainstem and cerebellum do. And so, and even in Chinese medicine, acupuncture points, the descriptions of them, they're all allegories for what the actual science behind it is. They just told it in a different story form. And this idea that ancient myths and ancient stories are really ways of communicating science is well established. Like we know that the the Egyptian myth of Isis and Osiris is the story of the Earth's precessional cycle. It's the story of how the stars move. And they just told their science in story form because we remember stories much more than we remember facts. Like, we're not wired for facts, we're wired for stories.
Right.
And so I really look at all of these myths in a new way, that the story of the Nemean lion that goes with the Leo constellation is really a story about blood flow through the heart to me. And and these stories have obviously evolved as stories do. But I created a form of energy medicine around this, and a way of just approaching the body and approaching nervous system regulation, integrating astrology and how we are literally geometrically hard facts made in the image of the zodiac. And as a physical therapist, the geometry of the body has been my great love for 30 plus years. I love how our joints and pieces and parts all work relative to each other.
Mm-hmm.
And so the connection of all of this to modern science in my world, because I've also taught neuroscience and somatic courses,
Mm-hmm.
is even if you don't believe in astrology, the zodiac is a clock. The sun moves through all the constellations every year, and the moon moves through all of them every month. And the same parts of the brain that you would rehabilitate for trauma are involved in time perception and processing. And basically every mental health diagnosis that you know that's out in the mainstream, a lot of neurological diagnoses, eating disorders, Parkinson's, autism, dystonia. And as an orthopedic sports physical therapist, I will say that all of every orthopedic injury that exists has time perception and processing at the root of it, that they all share this. And so when we can organize time perception and processing in our brains, we tend to have less pain, less effects of trauma. Our moods are more stable. We can be more focused and goal oriented and not get stuck in maladaptive behavioral loops. And functionally, our bodies are clocks. If the zodiac is clock and we're made in a clock and we're made in the image of this great clock, our bodies are clocks. And I love reading the time science from the physicists because they talk about the missing cerebral clock. Like, they know what parts of the brain do what parts of the, manage what parts of time. But they're like, well, we don't know where the clock is. I'm like, oh, your whole body's the clock.
Wow.
And so I think we're kind of like fish that don't know the water exists, that we're literally swimming in time,
Yes.
and so close to it and I understand all the illusions and the constructs and whatnot around time that exist. And, some of those are certainly true. But I think I think we are so deeply swimming in time that we don't realize how close we are. And certainly as we all age, and I know a lot of your listeners are kind of in a midlife
Absolutely.
stage.
Yes.
For me, I always think I'm 54 now, and I always think about I'm not going to be able to tell you exactly which movie, but it was a Star Trek movie, and where Jean-Luc Picard talked about how he had more days behind him than he does ahead.
Yes.
And that really hit me when I got over 50.
Yes.
That I probably have less time ahead of me than I do behind me. And how do I want to spend my time? And the gift of all the hormones and menopause is that you kind of stop messing around with your time. Like, you really want to get it together and have the time that you want in your life. And we will never sell trauma-informed care to the whole world because not everybody wants to deal with their trauma. But a lot of people would like to be able to have a different relationship with their time.
Absolutely.
And you can use that very prescriptively in conjunction with the zodiac to be able to kind of create the time that you want. And I think these stories really, it's interesting because they really are, the body parts are so interestingly threaded into our spiritual stories. Like, we all reflexively know that if we want to feel more joy or more playful, that's kind of a heart-centered thing, that we need to have a lighter heart. And in astrology, Leo rules the heart, and play is associated with Leo. So you would absolutely do more heart-centered exercises if you wanted to be more playful. If you wanted to be more spiritual, you might do foot-centered exercises, because Pisces is the spiritual home of the zodiac, and Pisces rules the feet. And certainly, like, the Bible has all sorts of stories about foot washing and things like that. And so we really, and we associate feet with our spiritual path, with our path and purpose, with,
Moving
you know,
forward.
moving
Yeah.
forward and things like that. And so it all matches up. And I'm
Yes.
not sure we're capable of creating something that's not really made in the image of the Zodiac. 12-step programs fit into the Zodiac model. The hero's journey fits into the Zodiac model. It's like we're doing the same thing, just in so many different ways.
It's incredible, isn't that the truth, though?
Yeah. So that's the beautiful thing about healing to me, is that there really are like 47,000 different ways to get there. You
Yes.
don't have to pick one path, but I, having really worked so deeply with the vagus nerve from before social media even existed, and having worked with the neuroscience and somatics and in so many different ways, I think working with the body as a clock and working with time perception and processing for me is hands down the most efficient way to help people get what they want.
So I have a couple of questions for you
Yeah,
as you're speaking. Do you believe in generational trauma where you carry? Okay.
absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And I do a
Okay.
lot with that too, because, and I can
Please.
share a couple personal stories about this, because generational trauma is real. The science shows that our DNA gets tagged with the traumas of our ancestors.
Hmm.
And we get the good stuff too,
Oh, good.
obviously, but sometimes the traumas get a little more attention than
Yes.
the my favorite study is actually in that realm, is actually a mouse study. But when they train a male mouse to be afraid of the smell of cherry blossoms, its grandmice will be afraid of the smell of cherry blossoms, even though they've never had any exposure to a cherry blossom.
Wow.
So a lot of our fears and habits and triggers and whatnot might not even be ours. And I have a very difficult relationship with my mother, and have my whole life. When understanding astrology and putting our astrology charts together has given me a lot of compassion for both of us.
Hmm.
She just considers it her job to disrupt what I love and value. And so I don't take it personally, and I'll just leave it at that. It's been hard. And it's gotten easier, but it's still challenging. Anyway, through just my own process of testing how my body moves in different ways, I started testing how my mother was moving in my body. Like, how is she turning in my head? And I just kind of just a basic range of motion test, but just with that intention. I could test, because if I was testing how I'm breathing, my breathing is fine. But years ago when I started this, I was like, well, how is my mother breathing in my body? And my breathing pattern completely shifted when I asked that question.
Wow.
And so then when I did my exercises to correct that, or treated myself with I have a technique I call electrofascial release that I do hands-on. It's kind of my myofascial release technique. And when I treated myself, with that intention, or for the way that tension was living in my body, like, how is my mother living in my lungs? And I just got this big pull, like things were pulling in opposite directions. It's like, okay, I'm going to take the tension out of that, just like I would if I was treating somebody else. And it softened my relationship with my mother so dramatically. And she started showing up differently. I didn't get triggered in the same way that I would have before. And it really has created massive amounts of healing. I've had a lot of foot issues, especially the last 15 years, which I equate mostly to Neptune. I will assign it to Neptune entering Pisces, because that's when it all started, which rules the feet. But my mom has had a lot of foot problems. My grandmother had foot problems, and really trying to heal this generational foot issue in my family, in my mother line, has been a huge focus for myself. And I've helped others do the same and work with those generational signatures for them. And so, yeah, the generational tags is real, and it will literally show up in our bodies. And people think, oh, well, my mother had knee problems, my grandmother had knee problems, I have knee problems, like we all needed knee replacements. That's just the way it is. But very often we mimic the people that raised us when we move. So we just really adopt their bad movement
Right.
habits. But there are deeper threads there that you can really undo. And the epidemiological research with studies with thousands, 30, 40, 50,000 people, show that pain and imaging are very poorly correlated. Pain is 100% in your brain. And you can have a crappy joint and not have pain. So you don't have to assign the pain to the arthritis, but we have a very strong collective belief system around that. And a lot of industries built around the stories that go with that.
Yeah.
But you can absolutely change the way your body is informing your brain.
And how would you do that? Give us the tea.
You have to. Well, so the first step is really decompressing your vagus nerve and unpinching it, because your vagus nerve manages inflammation among a million other functions. But if you're dealing with pain, and that's really how I got it into treating the vagus nerve as a pinched nerve, because I learned that a million years ago, that like it just helps the body manage pain so much better.
Melanie, not to
Yes.
interrupt you, but let's start with telling us what is the vagus nerve? Where is it located? I know it's pretty much.
Yep.
So let's start at that point and then take it from there with the pain, because I'm so curious.
So your vagus nerve is your 10th cranial nerve, and it comes out of your brainstem. So it comes down through the base of your skull, and it actually has lots of branches, and it's very big. It goes all in women, it innervates the cervix. So it goes all the way from your brainstem down to the pelvis. It goes down to your heart to innervate your heart. It loops back from your heart. It loops back up to your vocal cords to innervate your vocal cords. So I like to think of it as the nerve that allows us to speak our hearts.
Oh, I love that.
It's in your lungs. It's in basically all of your organs, just not your adrenal glands, because your vagus nerve is the biggest part of your parasympathetic nervous system. So it counters all our fight and flight responses.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's a lot of calming, rest, digest, grace under pressure. Those kinds of things come from your vagus nerve. As it travels down your esophagus, goes through your diaphragm, it innervates your muscles of your digestive system. So it helps us move food through our digestive system. It helps us absorb water. We cannot absorb vitamin B12 without our vagus nerves.
Wow.
So it's very important in nutrient absorption. It's important in enzyme production. We all know when our vagus nerve isn't working well, since most people have a little bit of a stage fright response if they get up in front of people. When you get that lump in your throat and your palms are sweating and your heart is racing and your stomach's churning, that's all because your vagus nerve has been dialed down and your fight and flight responses have been dialed up. But what happens in the body when we get stressed, rotation is the first thing that we give up. Like nobody is stressed or traumatized and walks down the sidewalk with really great arm swing. We all keep our arms in close to our body when we're stressed and traumatized, and we don't rotate freely. And so where we have horizontal structures in the body, this is a little hard to describe in podcast form, but rotation happens on the horizontal in the body. If you had a broomstick you were holding in each hand, holding sideways, that's the plane that rotation is happening on. So the broomstick would be horizontal. Mm-hmm. The base of our skull is horizontal. Our vocal cords are horizontal. At the level of our collarbones, our pulmonary artery and vein are horizontal. Our diaphragms are horizontal. Our arteries and veins of our kidneys are horizontal. Our pelvic floor is horizontal. So these horizontal structures are really where the vagus nerve gets hung up. And so I have manual techniques that I use with people to undo that. There are also exercises, and I could walk everybody through a bit of an exercise to decompress the vagus nerve right now. But that's the first step. The second step, a lot of it is getting in the way I talked about how we were made in the image of the zodiac, that this, I call it this zodiacal skeleton, that we have to get this nervous system to solar system connection going. And there's so much cool science around how our nervous systems really do connect to the solar system and how solar and space weather influence our bodies in many ways, but very specifically our vagus nerves. So to me, that's super exciting. And I know that that's a big thought to think that the solar and space weather is influencing your body. But when you can move all that energy through your body, then you're just healthier and things will not short circuit. Right. Basically, there are very specific ratios of space weather that go with heart attacks versus strokes versus cancer deaths versus accident deaths versus car accident deaths. So it's just fascinating how the science really plays into that. But what I take from the science and what I know about the body is that the more regulated your nervous system is to the solar system, the more the energy can move through you. It's kind of like feng shuiing your house. Like you want the energy to flow.
Right.
in your house so that it feels good, that when the energy can flow well through your body, then you tend to have fewer health problems.
And how could we do
How
that?
can All right. Well, I will say one, keep an eye out for my retreats and some courses, and there
Oh,
will certainly be events that people can work with me to do that. My website is my name, melanieweller.com. So if you want to find out
okay.
more, please reach out to me.
I
Um,
put that all in the show notes of this podcast. Okay, so that's a
Thank you.
good start.
But just to give you a little example, right
Yeah.
now, like for anyone who's listening, if you're doing something else, please stop. If you're going to do this exercise, give it your full attention. Don't multitask. Don't drive and do it. Don't operate kitchen tools and do it. I promise I have ended up in the emergency room from kitchen tools. Just be present with it.
Okay.
All right. So what I want you to do is first just check into your body and see where it is right now. Like turn your head and see how far you can go side to side and notice maybe where, like Susan, I can see when you turned your head to your left, you sort of twisted your whole body for part of it. So just start to see where maybe you start to compensate in some other place. You could cross your arms on your chest and just turn side to side and just see about how far you rotate to each side there. You could also put a hand on the front of your chest and a hand comfortably, like the back of your hand on the back of your chest,
Mm-hmm.
and take a couple deep breaths and just see how your breath feels. What you want is to feel equal movement forward with the front hand and backwards with the back hand. But most people, at least the first time I see them, don't do that. Like they'll go, like the backhand will stay still, or maybe there's like kind of a lot of vertical movement, like you're with a deep breath, like maybe they're breathing with their shoulders. But ideally, you want this nice front to back
Mm-hmm.
expansion. So check your breath. You just want to collect a little bit of objective data. If you have a tight hip flexor or tight calf muscle and you want to go stretch that to make that your before and after, go do that. You can take any data that you like here. And so next, you can do this in sitting, preferably a little bit towards the edge of the chair just so that you're sitting up straight. You're going to cross your left ankle in front of your right
Left, left.
and just like
Okay.
very gently push them together. You don't need to be working hard, but just have a little bit of, you just want to be in an active posture versus all slouched and passive. You're going to take your right hand and reach it across your body. If you can get it all the way to the outside of your left thigh, you can do that, but just reach across however you can. If you can do this, put your left hand behind your head. If you don't have the shoulder motion to do that, you can just relax it at your side or cross it over your chest. And now you're going to inhale into the back side of your heart. So you want your ribs, like between the space between your shoulder blades, you want to put the breath there. You want to try and have your ribs expand to the back of your chair or the wall, whatever's behind you. And then you're going to hold your breath for a couple seconds. So maybe inhale for 3, hold for 5, and then exhale like you're blowing out through a straw for at least 8 seconds. So that's 3, 5, 8. So inhale for 3 into the backside of your heart. And I recognize that's a weird cue. Sometimes you might need a friend or family member to put a hand there to get it, or you might need to stand against the wall to figure it out. But inhale for 3, hold for 5, long exhale for 8, and just do 3 or 5 breaths in that position. And then retest your motion and see if it feels different.
Looser.
Looser, yeah,
Like my
absolutely.
range of motion is more.
It's more, yes.
Yeah,
And so
it's
that's a
great.
very positive response. This
Yeah.
exercise overwhelmingly gives people that exact same response. If you're somebody who is hypermobile or maybe has a diagnosis of Ehlers-Danlos or which is a connective tissue disorder, sometimes for those people, it'll actually make you feel a little bit tighter, which is good. Because if you're too mobile or, if you're excessively flexible, a positive response can really be feeling a little bit more solid and grounded in your body and maybe a little bit less range of motion.
So this exercise that we just did allows us to activate the vagus nerve.
It mechanically frees it up
Okay.
at the level of the heart in particular, but I find that this often decompresses it at least a few different places.
Okay. Because I've heard that humming will activate the vagus nerve as well.
Absolutely, it does. but a pinched vagus nerve cannot activate no matter how much you exercise it.
Okay. So
So
the
this is
exercise.
very specifically designed to unpinch the nerve.
Okay.
And humming is great. And humming can really open it up, and it can get pinched at the level of the vocal cords. And it can be very, very helpful. I just, in the people that come see me, humming, I absolutely do tell people to hum. I give a lot of vocal exercises. So
Okay.
that's not I absolutely use vocal exercises. But as a starting point, the return on investment from just humming, I don't find nearly as powerful as doing I call this exercise helical breathing. If you do this helical breathing and then hum, you're probably going to get a bigger response from your humming than you would if you had just done the humming
Gotcha.
yourself.
Okay. So now explain, because you said that injury doesn't need to be associated with pain. So if someone sprains their ankle or breaks their leg, I know that normally there's pain associated with that. How do you
Sure.
remove that pain? Or the
Well,
signal going to your brain, I guess.
yeah, yeah. Well, you don't really have pain receptors. You kind of have threat receptors. Like your brain is what's making up the pain.
Okay.
Your brain is interpreting that signal as pain. And so you have to create safety in your nervous system. You have to create safety in your body. And pain in an acute when you initially sprain your ankle is, it's valuable because you get off the ankle and you rest
Yes.
but when people have pain, a month or 6 weeks or 6 months or 3 years post injury, that's not coming from injured tissue. And in fact, beyond 6 weeks, it's not coming from injured tissue. It's it's in the brain. Like your brain has learned, it's a threat response to the brain. So you have to create safety. And what those our body parts get when we get injuries are those body parts, the map of them in our brain is fuzzy. So
Mm-hmm.
the more that we can clarify the map of our body and our brain, the less pain that we tend to have. So for an ankle sprain, I might have one, I would absolutely have somebody do helical breathing. And I have a funny story about when I broke my foot and going to the emergency room with that. But for your foot, you might even like rub it with a soft cloth and like get in between the toes, and just really tell your brain like, oh, look, here's my ankle. My ankle is safe. And you're probably not going to do that in the first 48 hours when it's
Right.
really acute, but as it gets better and, to keep it from turning into a chronic situation, those are absolutely the more you remap your foot to your brain, then the more likely the pain is to go away and the less likely you are to re-injure it as well.
I have a question. My mom is 90. She has stenosis and she's in pain every single day. So, how does she? So, you think these exercises would help her?
Oh, I think absolutely. I think the helical breathing. I will tell you, stenosis is a tough situation. And when we have 90, if we're lucky enough to have 90 years of bad habits of movement behind us,
Right.
that like it can be a lot to undo. The biggest gift I think that we can give ourselves is walking softly,
Yes.
because we all know somebody who is like an elephant coming down the hall, and and who they are from however far away
Yes.
they start because of how loud their footsteps are. And other people are like ninjas that appear out of nowhere next to you. and but we know that the harder you hit the ground, the more your higher your injury risk is.
Okay.
And in people over 60 with spinal arthritis, half of them have pain and half of them don't have pain, even when you account for severity. So what's the difference between somebody that has a crappy spine on x-ray, that has a lot of arthritic changes on x-ray,
Yes.
that has pain, and somebody that doesn't? And we know that you can pull people off the street and do MRIs and people will have massively herniated discs and no pain. And so the difference is not in what the image looks like. The difference is in how you're loading it and how much shock absorption you have in your system.
Wow.
And walking is basically a controlled fall from one foot to the other. But when we stop controlling the fall and we start crashing from one foot to the other, then we are sending more shock through our system. And concurrently, we probably also have less shock absorption available to us if we're doing that. So don't walk slower, but walk softer.
Wow, that's great advice.
And don't change. You're still going to walk heel to toe. But I think that, if I was going to really just, that's just kind of putting all the gait PT research. When I see somebody, like even the gentleman I started with the suicide ideation, like he had no shock absorption in his system. He just had it was showing up for him as not, he had no emotional shock absorption, but he also had no physical shock absorption. They are the same thing in your body. And if you can, so the more shock absorption you can give yourself, and that helical breathing is one exercise that tends to bring back a significant amount of shock absorption for people. There are, sometimes we need extra help to do that. With spinal stenosis, there's like my electrofascial release technique is really, I developed it out of this principle of tensegrity, which describes the architecture of all living things. And tensegrity is the combination of continuous tension and isolated compression. So in humans, our bones handle the compression part in our system, and our muscles and connective tissue help keep the tension, give us joint space. So like spinal stenosis or somebody that needs a joint replacement, like they've got mass compression and they've lost their tension that's holding the joint space. And so there are some ways, and certainly exercise helps us create joint space, but there are other more subtle factors that, that I use my magic hands and train other therapists to have magic hands too, so that, and train people to even try and treat themselves and their family members so that they can, I think we should all know how to do this. To me, this is like basic, like we kind of know more about our cars typically than we do about our bodies.
Absolutely.
And so like we should just know, this should be like basic first aid. Like you should have Band-Aids, but you should know how to do some soft tissue work for your family, and know how to touch each other. Like we are all so, I think, under touched, and certainly like there are sensory exercises that we can, like sometimes just even like patting yourself, hugging yourself, rubbing your arms and stuff can be, and hands can be really, really valuable for your nervous system. But, we're not wired to be here alone either, and having somebody that you feel comfortable putting your hands on and having somebody that, whose hands you feel comfortable having on you can be incredibly therapeutic. And then to add like just a little bit of skill to that, it can really just create miracles in different ways. But I think collectively we have this loneliness epidemic. Loneliness on our bodies is the same as smoking 15 cigarettes a day.
Wow.
We need to be less lonely. We need to be more comfortable touching each other, giving and receiving. And that's been a huge part of my journey. I know that I didn't come from people that hugged, and I can remember being really annoyed by hugs growing up. And like hugs were for people I thought you hadn't seen in a year. I didn't like, that was not, hugs were not a daily thing that I remember. And I know that I learned how to give touch, that through touching my patients, that I have learned how to receive
Yeah.
touch for myself. But I think, and I know I've treated so many patients over the years that I think I could have just laid my hands on them and done nothing, and they would have been better just because they were so undertouched in the rest of their lives.
Wow. That's kind of sad, right?
Oh, it is. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, and I'm the person, like I will say, for as much as I have rejected, been uncomfortable with hugs, and my friends know this, like they all ask permission to hug me usually before. And the universe stuck me in New Orleans where everybody hugs and kisses. We do the French influence. So people are kissing on the both cheeks, and like the universe is not letting me out of this.
Yeah.
But I also I recognize that if I was really, that probably the thing I really want the most is to sit next to somebody and groom you like a monkey, like to just like be really touchy.
Yeah.
But like that just is socially weird for most people.
Right.
So I
Right.
don't, so I resist that urge to
So I want to go
curl up
back.
next to my friends. But
I want to go back to the exercise that we
yeah,
did.
yeah.
If someone's mentally not open to something like that,
Hmm.
where they're saying, oh, this is a bunch of crap, I'm assuming it probably will not benefit them as well as someone who is, because I'm open to everything. I'm a
Yeah.
Reiki master also.
I find that for that exercise, I do not find that the beliefs really influence it that much.
Okay.
I mean, I understand that. And I do get people, I'm very good at going toe to toe with the science
Right.
people if that's really, if they don't want to hear it. But our imaginations are very powerful,
Yes.
and if they, and the magic of working with any client or patient is in meeting them where they are.
Right.
But at this stage of my career, I don't get people that argue with me very hard because they've been to 10 or 15 other people before they found me.
Yeah.
So, like, you're not coming to me out of your insurance network and not doing what I'm, or not at least being a little bit open
Right.
to that. But, very honestly, that breathing exercise is, it's really just a hardcore mechanical exercise. In all humans, the right side of the diaphragm has more muscle mass than the left. So theoretically, the right side is always going to win. And this takes you out of your right sided diaphragm dominance and starts to balance it out.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. It's not a spiritual exercise. I do think that because I have people kind of spiraled up like a strand of DNA, and like the way our solar system rotates, that gives it some extra potency.
Yes.
But I can also just say that I'm taking you out of your right-sided diaphragm dominance, which we all have. Because even if you're left-handed, you live in a right-handed world, and our livers are on the right side of our body, and our diaphragm just lays down more muscle mass on top of that. But, because it's got more surface area to connect with on that side of the body.
Mm-hmm.
So that's just hard facts. But I don't argue. If somebody's arguing with me, I'm like, well, tell me how well what you've been doing is working for you, because you
Yeah.
didn't come here. Like, I am not your first rodeo,
Right.
and it's fine. I mean, I don't, and all I will say is just all you can do is experiment with it. You can take all of the science, but the science doesn't really matter if it doesn't work on your body.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And for most people, I would say for 50 or 60% of the people that I see, the hardcore science works great for them. For another 30% or so, it works so for them, and
Mm-hmm.
they need a little bit more. And for 10%, like, they just don't follow the rules. They wrote their own textbook with their body, and I have to figure out how to read their textbook to see how it works. But our bodies and brains are very powerful. Imagery is very powerful. We unite under flags of countries and sports teams and company logos, and those all have influences on our brains. And you can, one of my favorite things to do when I teach physical therapists is to take someone who has neck restrictions and really have them in front of the class and really demonstrate the mechanical tests that show the neck restrictions. And we have a bone behind our eyes that makes up part of the base of the skull that's called the sphenoid bone, and it looks like an owl. And I'll have the group, like, I won't even touch the person. I will have them imagine that the person with the neck restriction has this big, beautiful owl flying in her head behind her eyes, and that they're going to get it so the wings are nice and big and fluffy, and it's strong and soaring, and the eyes are focused, and adding all the any color detail and speckles and whatever that owl looks like.
Mm-hmm.
And then I'll go retest the person, and they are always better,
Oh, that's
like massively better, because the group imagined
yes.
for them. And it's incredible how it works. It's so powerful. And
A
so
mind
there,
is, right?
yeah, our minds are, and when we can not even imagine for ourselves, but imagine for each other that something else is possible,
Yes.
it's really magical. And to me, that makes healing fun. That makes it joyful. My profession is so guilty of making healing really boring exercises. And I get it. Sometimes you just got to do the grind.
Right.
But when you can take it into a more imaginal space, and there's tons of brain science around that. I mean, and there has been for decades. Athletes use guided imagery and visualization for particularly high level athletes
Yes.
for their events. And so we can do the same thing for ourselves, and we can do the same thing for each other. And it can look like real, like what's real, or it could show up in archetypal terms, that we're
Mm-hmm.
going to treat the sphenoid bone, but we're going to treat it like it's an owl. But it's the same geometry, basically.
Yeah.
It's the archetypal similarity. And so that's why it works. And so I think healing, you know, like I'm all about the science, but I think we really have to push the boundaries of that because too many people are falling through the cracks.
Yeah, for sure. So your programs that you have, do you do virtual? People can
I do
join
virtual
virtually?
as well. Yeah. Yep. Absolutely. And I do for my Substack community. I write on Substack and I do virtual healings usually twice a month
Okay.
for the
Yeah.
Substack community, and that's super cheap to join.
Oh,
the
nice.
and like all the way up, I do take some one-on-one clients. I see people in person in New Orleans and in Nashville, Tennessee as well. So I do have people that travel to come see me, and I'm the biggest things I have coming up are two Mary Magdalene, or I have a week of Mary Magdalene retreats in Tennessee coming up that are on my website in July 2025, and this happens every July. And I'm taking a group of people to France in September and October it's also a Mary Magdalene journey, but my piece of it that I bring to the table in both July and in France is the neurology of miracles, and adding that
Wow, that's
piece to it.
beautiful.
And I do a lot of work around religious trauma and what I call heretical healing, because religious trauma is different than other trauma in the brain. And when we can heal that, and it's real, and religion is really about our relationship with time, like whether we live eternally or it all ends when we
Right,
die. Either way, it's all, our belief systems are all about our relationship with time.
right.
And people really manipulate, or we can be very much manipulated about that relationship with time. But whatever we believe about that big clock kind of time influences how we spend our time here. And I have a lot of clients, and have had over the years, whose parents don't communicate with them because they're not towing the religious party line, and they've been excommunicated from their families. And so just a big chunk of the population that I've worked with over the years. And and it shows up in your body, and there's and they all still really want the spirituality, like they don't want to throw the baby out with the bathwater. They just
Yeah.
don't know how to find the middle ground. And so I help people a lot with that, so that they can move forward and have their spirituality and thrive.
Wow, I love what you're doing. It's phenomenal. It really is.
Oh, thank you,
So,
Susan.
Melanie, should I reach out to Julie to get like your Substack information or
Oh yeah, I can email. You know what? I'll email it to you right now
Okay, great.
so that you have it. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. This was absolutely wonderful. I loved every minute of it. I want you to come back again because you have so much knowledge. We've been on for a full hour and I have like a ton more things I could talk to you about. So you have to come back.
I absolutely will, Susan. This has been absolutely joyful. I will talk. I can talk all day long. I hope that everybody got kind of a. I sometimes I didn't warn everybody this time, but I sometimes warn people to buckle up because I'm going to take you on a ride of
It was
information. But I promise. But you know, my superpower is really in connecting the dots for people, and when you can, and I find that just really helps create a lot of compassion and an understanding for ourselves and for each other, and and really frees us up to move forward, and when we're not stuck in one particular way of thinking about something.
Yes. And what I love is that you absolutely love what you're doing. So it lights you up and it just makes it even more exciting to listen to you, and you have so much great information.
Oh, well,
Really
thank you.
appreciate it. The
Thank you,
whole
Susan.
astrology thing isn't, you have to come back just to talk about that because
Oh,
that
sure. Yeah. Well, I'll say like real quick, there is a Zodiac and the Vagus Nerve workbook that's free on my website if you want to go if
oh
anyone wants to go grab that, which has pictures with it. But yes, it's just geometry with a lot of stories attached to it, but it's just geometry. Like
wow.
that's the, I just, but I would bore everybody all day long talking about angles. It's much more fun to talk about it in terms of story.
That's true. Okay, thank you so much. I appreciate it. And please come back again.